The Escape Your Limit podcast gets close up and personal with some of the leading entrepreneurs in the world of fitness and wellness. You'll find out what drives them, fuels them, and motivates them to give one more rep, even when no one else is counting. So now over to your host, serial entrepreneur and co-founder of Escape Fitness, one of the world's leading functional training brands, Matthew Januszek.
So no, I'm not getting a haircut. I'm here in St Mary's Axe in the City of London, and One Rebel, the disruptive boutique gym operator in the UK, and we're here to meet James Balfour. He's the founder and operator of One Rebel, and we're going to hear a bit about his story. So today we're here with James Balfour, the co-founder and CEO of One Rebel. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know if you remember, and you probably don't, but the first time I met you was it's probably about 15 years ago, at a place called Momentum. Yep. You remember Momentum? Yep. And you was there with some champagne. And I came in the front door today and I sort of thought, well, some things don't change because there was Prosecco in the juice bar. And,
well, that was the Fitness First sort of yearly conference. And I remember I always used to get in trouble because I would get hold of my dad's charge card. And age sort of 15, 17, 18, I'd get the charge card and try and order lots of champagne and hope that I could get some attention, which worked better over the years. But I needed some practice.
Yeah, good. So just take us back. You know, it's interesting. Obviously, very famous father, and won't spend a lot of time there. But take us back to sort of younger days. You know, what was it like? As a youngster, obviously, being in a house with an entrepreneur and seeing the growth of Fitness First. What was it like at that time?
Well, Fitness First started when I was about 10 or 11, right. And it was the first club was in Bournemouth, and we lived in a reasonable house in Berkshire, I think it was, and my dad had to put that up as collateral for the bank, so we all had to move out of that, and for about 6 months my mum, my sister and I lived in an annex of someone else's house, whilst he basically worked with the banks to take over this derelict squash club and turn it into what was then the Queen's Park Health Club,
right.
Set in Bournemouth next to the Queen's Park golf course. And I remember being about 11 years old when my dad came home to the family with a load of Fitness First logos, and we picked as a family. We sat down on the lounge floor, looked at the various logos, and the Fitness First in blue, sort of italics, became the logo. Which is really interesting because I met with Scott Best the other day, who obviously is now running Fitness First with DW, and we talked about how the brand has changed, and it's just, he probably never heard that story, and it's weird to think of it now, but it was great. I mean, my father's always been entrepreneurial, always been very busy, and I wasn't able to really connect with that as a teenager so much, but when I turned sort of 18 or so, I was able to talk to him much more about business, right. And that then made my mind start to think. Yeah. And I liked the idea that business is problem solving or making things better.
Right.
And as a genesis of any sort of business, I think if you're solving those two things, you might have legs to go on.
Yeah. So what in terms of school then? Did you have a sort of traditional sort of schooling? Were you good, bad?
I was at a private school before Fitness First.
Right.
When Fitness First started, money was a bit tighter, so I was moved into a grammar school where I stayed from 11 to 17. I was more of a white-collar criminal than in the sense that I was naughty, but not, I didn't get into fights or do anything that bad, but I was always upsetting the teachers, and I was in particular upsetting my dad because he had to work very hard for everything he had. And what frustrated my teachers is that if I enjoyed something, I was very good at it. Yeah. If I didn't, I was lazy and wasn't interested. So the idea that I had potential but was lazy irritated my father like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed school for what it was. And then I went to university and studied politics and international relations.
Yeah.
I loved the course. didn't like university. I found doing 2 hours a day just annoyed me. I wished I could have done 3 years in 1 year because I wanted to move on and do other things.
And at school then, when you say there was things you were good at and not, what were the things sort of in the early days that you kind of leant towards and felt?
I think things like history, geography, politics, anything to do with like physics or statistics, I just had no interest in. And if anything, that characteristic hasn't changed. If I'm interested in something, I am all in. You know, I have no poker face. I'm just passionate about it. If I'm not, I find it very hard to give any focus to it. And sometimes that can be seen as a weakness, but I think in business, I think you've got to focus on your strengths and compensate for your weaknesses. And by compensating for your weaknesses, it tends to be through getting people to help you with your team. So the things I'm not good at, the things I don't have interest in, it's very important to find people who are good at that, because then you can focus on your strengths.
So when you sort of left school and went into university then, what were you thinking at the time? Did you have because I guess your dad, entrepreneur, businessman, were you thinking, well, that's the sort of route I was, or you wanted to do something totally different?
Well, I wanted to join the army. I think the thing that stopped me from probably getting expelled out of laziness was the cadet force at school, and then the officers training corps at university. And I wanted to join the army. That's where I felt comfortable, what I loved doing. My father was dead against it. He felt I should get into the city and get into finance. And in the end, we did a bit of a hybrid, really. I started as a stockbroker after university for a small boutique bank in London, but I also joined a territorial army regiment called the Honourable Artillery Company, which is quite a specific regiment. It sort of sits just below Special Forces. It's territorial, so you do it on weekends and evenings, but everybody has to join as an infantry soldier. You can't join as an officer. But being based in the city, it tends to get brokers, lawyers, doctors, so quite smart and capable infantry soldiers. And it was all about working, planning and preparing to go behind enemy lines and do reconnaissance on the enemy. So it was a lot of marching with weight across the Brecon Beacons, and I loved it. And it fit into a lot of things I was also doing in terms of expeditions and adventure, which was always something that I was very passionate about. So I was in the city doing my stockbroking and the army for 3 years before I left to basically fulfill my dream of climbing mountains for some time.
And what was that army thing? Did you have anyone else in the family that was doing it? What kind of drew you to that?
My grandparents obviously were. I definitely think, I can remember a time when I was about 12 with my grandfather, and we had a world map on one of the walls in our house. And he told me the story of when at 19 he left Cardiff to join the army and move to India, where he was training soldiers in case the Japanese invaded India. And he told this story of going on the boat around the Horn of Africa and stopping in at Sierra Leone, which was a former colonial outpost for Britain. And it was just mind-boggling for him because he had never seen Africa, he'd never seen anything like that. And this story of adventure and seeing things for the first time and then going off to fight a war, which thankfully he never fired his weapon in anger, but that was captivating for me. I loved that. And ever since that conversation, travel and adventure has been my number one passion. Yeah.
So the Everest sort of journey, was that, did you finish being a stockbroker and then decide you were going to do that, or was that?
I'd wanted to do that from like 14.
Right, okay.
When I was 17, I sort of climbed my first sort of big peak, which was Kilimanjaro. I went off by myself with some friends and did that. And I was hooked, and there's a thing called the 7 Summits, which is trying to climb the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, and I realized that that's what I want to do. And obviously the pinnacle was Everest. So after doing 3 years in the city, I took about 9 months off, and I just spent 9 months climbing mountains, just the big, the beautiful, the horrible. I was in Antarctica, Alaska, all over the Himalayas many times, and it culminated with summiting Everest when I was 24.
Wow.
Yeah, so and I still do it. I don't try and go as high anymore because there are lots of risks. I think the statistic now with Everest is for every 10 people who summit, 1 person dies on the mountain.
Really?
So I try not to go as high, but of the 7 summits, I've done 5 so far, and I'm hoping to do my 6th in May next year.
Wow, fantastic. So when you came back, and was that sort of like a chapter closed, and then what happened from there then?
Well, I ran out of money for a start. Believe it or not, climbing mountains and just walking on Mother Nature is very expensive.
Right.
So I realised I had to get a job and had to do something. And I hadn't been interested in the fitness industry because I'd seen it.
Yeah.
I'd grown up with it. I was surrounded by it, and that was always my father's thing. But coming back from the mountains, I realised if I was going to do it, having his advice and mentoring and partnership was just a no-brainer. I could see other people warm to him and ask for his advice all the time. So the idea that I'd turn my back on that out of ego just became silly.
Yeah.
So we got together with also another guy called Tony Cowan, who was working in Fitness First before. And we said, okay, let's do fitness second, if you like.
Yeah.
And we'll take the concept under a new brand and go to emerging markets and try and emulate some of the success that Fitness First had in the likes of Asia by teaming up with shopping centres in emerging markets.
Right.
So we set up what was then called Pure Health and Fitness, but we rebranded to Thome Fitness.
Right. And just talk us through that story, because I remember, obviously, we'd worked with you guys for a long time, since early Fitness First. In fact, I remember going to Bournemouth and bringing some equipment in my car and holding it over one of the sort of cubicles, and your dad sat in the corner, and they showed him this, and he was like, yeah, okay, well, that was quite funny to see how they progressed. But yeah. So tell us about that, because I guess Fitness First must have been sort of gone through a lot of changes.
Well, my father had exited Fitness First at that point, so there was no relationship, if you like, with the company. And I think the markets were certainly changing. That company had grown so quickly and had been so successful. He took it to 550 clubs across 25 countries. And it just seemed like, okay, this is a home run if we do it again.
Right.
But I think, when I think about the Thome story, it's not a great success story.
Right.
We grew the business very, very quickly. We started off in Poland, where I moved to when I was 24. 7 years later, we had 70 clubs across 7 countries, in Eastern Europe, Turkey, and Southeast Asia. But I think we felt that whatever we did would work out. And we weren't intellectual about it. We weren't focused on what a brand meant and what brand stood for and how that can create advocacy from your customer base. Instead, we were opportunistic. We thought, okay, that site can be an upmarket one, that one can be a cheaper one. Let's just continue. And I think the mistake also we made was that we put English teams into foreign countries, right, thinking that they have superior knowledge, and not harnessing the skill sets on the ground in a way that we should have done. So it was one hell of an experience. We grew the company quickly. It was exciting. It was fun. But I had differences of opinions with my business partner on where we should be going. I was the younger, less experienced partner. And I realized that it wasn't something I was proud of anymore.
Right.
And I remember seeing the likes of SoulCycle and Barry's Bootcamp in the States and just thinking, okay, this is where I want to be.
Right.
This is about putting the customer first, putting the experience first, getting results, not tying people up into 12 months contracts. And I sort of said to the business that I wanted to go and do that. And my father made it very clear that if I did, I'd be walking away from everything. And I was turning 30, or just before 30, and I thought, yeah, okay, fine. I wanted to do it. So I had his support in the end, but I just walked away from it. And that's when Giles and I started One Rebel.
So you just picking up on the Thome thing, because you went out in Asia, and so you travelled a bit. I guess, sort of what was sort of going through your mind when you'd obviously seen the success of Fitness First, been part of this new business. What was sort of going through your thoughts in terms of where that business was going, and what was it?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's hard now, like the last few years when Fitness First has changed a lot. It's almost hard to watch it because I feel part of it. At the same time, I think of myself as an outsider in the industry, right, because I've never really paid too much attention to listening to why everything's always been done the way it's been done. When we recruit people, we try and recruit out of the industry because I'm always concerned that if you recruit from the industry, you get the industry average. And when I go and see businesses that are still doing the 7 stages of sales that Fitness First were doing 25 years ago, I'm concerned that the industry isn't sort of moving forward. So I was able to look at it dispassionately after a while, because I was much more interested in where the industry is going to go and what structural changes need to happen for it to be successful. Because if you look at the last 25 years, there's been some great successes which have ultimately failed over time. And you can blame, I think, overzealous growth. You could blame a loss of traction from the brand. You can blame competitive pressures and markets changing, businesses being too leveraged or signing the wrong property deals. There's a lot of lessons to learn, and I think, after time and after sort of becoming detached from Fitness First, I was able to look at it objectively and try and take some lessons from it.
And how did that make you feel personally? Like, I'm obviously business owner, and I guess I'm guessing that your business is similar to ours. It's a bit of a roller coaster. What was sort of the, were there any down parts, and what sort of, what went through your head to sort of kind of get you onto the next?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a roller coaster really, but I think if you want to be in business, that roller coaster is everything. Being able to weather the ups and downs and still look forward is essentially, you've got to enjoy that, otherwise you're not going to go, it will drive you crazy. But also the belief in moving forward always means you also have to, I think, let go of any hurt, any anger, any of those issues which you come across over the years in business for sure. And like I said, I'm not proud of the Thome story. There were some really good moments where I really believed it was going to be a huge success, but I can identify why it wasn't very clearly in my mind. And it's still going. I don't know exactly how well it's doing or not well. But I'm totally moved on from it as well, because you've got to keep going forward. And in theory, at the time when I walked away, the business was valued quite well. I, in theory, walked away from a lot of money. But I don't think about it for a second, because I'm truly proud of what we're doing at One Rebel, and I love it. And a lot of people don't believe me when I say I'm not interested in the financial return of this. I'm much more interested in what we can create. What the brand can be known for when people look back at it, or what people say about it now, because the rest will take care of itself if you're doing well at that stuff. Yeah.
And what's it like? I'm a family business. I work with my father, and I kind of get it, I guess. What's it like, or what was it like being? Are you still working with your father?
Yeah, he sits on my board as a non-exec. I don't think he quite understands what non-exec means. No, it's torture. It can be bloody miserable, but it can also be insightful and fantastic. And we are as close as we've ever been. I speak to him probably every day, and I absolutely admire him. He can be, like I said, he can be torturous towards me. Because there's no hold bars. But what I admire in particular is when I said to him, okay, we're calling it One Rebel because we want to rebel against everything we've done in the past. We want to rip up the idea of contracts on sales teams. We want to do everything differently. And I mean that when I say Thome, but also Fitness First. Yeah. And I said, your model is old now. It doesn't work. The future is this. And he was quick to understand it and actually say, yeah, I believe you're right, and I want to get behind it. I said in a press a year or so ago, and I got a bit, Fitness First didn't like it, but I said if Fitness First were truly proud of their product, they would tear up their contracts to see how many people come back the next day. And when it came out, I thought I'm going to get a call from Mike and get told off. And he called me up and said, "Go for it. Yeah, well done. That's what One Rebel's about." Because we've got to. I think the business has run for so long on this idea of locking people into a guilt-based proposition, 12-month contracts. Membership sales done by accounting practices. Buy now and get your 13th month for free. Yeah. And it frustrated me when I would sit at board meetings and we talked about net gain of members, but never the experience. Right. And that's where I think the boutiques shift the market, because it's all about the experience. Yeah. You've got to be the best in class in every class, otherwise people aren't coming back, and there's nothing to stop them. No. But that bit excites me more than makes me nervous.
So coming out of I guess an interesting time. How did you then sort of what sort of got you mentally? What was your inspiration to say, well, look, this is where I want to go. What was that? Who did you work with? And
well, I think I would go to the States a lot and look at SoulCycle and Barry's Bootcamp in particular. And SoulCycle deserve all the credit, in my view, for the boutique, the emergence of the boutique industry, because what they established was, if you look at a gym floor of Equinox, Virgin, Pure Gym, 10 square meters, it's pretty much the same. It's some treadmills, it's some weights. It might be a different flooring and a different color, but that 10 square meters of the gym floor is very, very similar. And what they recognize is actually the value is in the classes. If you specialize in the classes, get the best instructors, invest in sound, lighting, and experience, you can charge $34 per seat. And forget the big membership and just putting as much kit in a big room as possible. Focus on a speciality, brand it well, but have integrity of the brand, and a payment system, if you like, that redresses the balance between the company and the consumer.
Right.
Because on a pay-as-you-go basis, you've got to work hard for that repeat visit.
Yeah.
And I think the 12-month contract thing can create apathy within the business, where they stop working hard for that experience because they know they've got you locked in.
Yeah.
So I thought what they've done, I just thought was fantastic. And also the very fact that when you're being pushed in that group, you can get results of personal training, but at a fraction of the cost. And I often talk about the boutique industry competing with the big box gyms, but in many respects, I think they compete with personal training.
Right.
Because for a long time, I'd see a Fitness First membership be £60 and an hour personal training be £60, and say one of them is wrong. I'm getting access to £1.5 million club with 200 bits of kit and a guy who's going to watch me do press-ups. One of those numbers is wrong. And even at the highest price point at One Rebel, if you come and buy one session at £20, I think you get the results of personal training at a fraction of the cost and in a much more fun environment.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so coming into the One Rebel business, you sort of, I guess, had an idea, and it was quite bold because we're in the first location, in a high street location, which definitely wasn't being done when you did this. I think the market probably was more, going low cost.
Yeah.
How did you have confidence to invest what was probably $1 million plus in some high street location, which sounds pretty crazy?
Yeah.
At the time.
I mean, we made some decisions, and I think when you sort of decide, you divide in terms of, we wanted to have a certain brand, a certain tone of voice, and we knew not everybody was going to like it, but those who did like it would love it.
Right.
And one thing we did very differently to the boutiques in the States was our focus on the changing rooms. We build big, beautiful changing rooms. We want that ancillary experience to be really, really strong. So, yeah, of course, you've got to have fantastic classes. Our classes have to be on par or better than Soul and Barry's. But I believe if you then have the ancillary experience of our beautiful change rooms, barber and blow dry stations, the Prosecco Fridays, if all of that is there, we're more sustainable on the long term. But of course it comes at a cost, both in capex, in rent, and that's where the risk is. And people have different models. This is what we believe in. But really, we designed something that we wanted to go to.
Right.
I think sometimes, was it a phrase? I think it was Henry Ford said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
Yeah.
And it's not arrogance that by not thinking about the customer, in the sense we wanted to design something and innovate, and we wanted to create a new way, a new experience. And I think we've done it. I think we've got a long way to go as well. We want to do a lot of new innovations and new improvements. But ultimately, we wanted to design something we would be proud of, and then learn as we go along. Yeah.
And just talking about how you sort of got, raised funding for this thing. So you went down a slightly different route. I don't know whether it's common. I've certainly not heard it before. But tell us a little bit about the.
Well, we thought that I think everything starts with your brand, okay? And we decided, as I said, to call the company One Rebel because we wanted to rebel against the things that we had done before. But also, I believe a rebellion isn't disruption for the sake of chaos. It's often challenging the status quo for an improvement. And we felt that needs to be in our tone and our vision for everything. When we design a reception desk to what sort of classes we put on, we need to be constantly saying, okay, if we were rebelling against what's been done before for improvement, what could it be? And we decided we're going to take that spirit in everything that we do. So when we first went to look at fundraising options, we spoke to a couple of private equity companies, and it was all the same, majority shareholding, run by spreadsheets. and it had no sort of heart and no sense. And then we saw crowdfunding options, and we decided to go down crowdfunding routes, and it's been a great success, and we've loved it as well, because often what people forget when they deal with a private equity guy is he's doing his job to stay in his job. It's not his money. He just wants to get his return so his boss is happy. When someone's invested in you through crowdfunding, they're investing money that could have gone to their children's education, could have gone to their Christmas holiday. It's already been taxed. There's a lot of heart that's gone into that investment. And so they buy into, I think, people, stories, vision, and a brand that they want to be associated with. So I liked that change in dynamic a lot.
Yeah. So coming back to you then, I saw pictures of you, in Iraq, and you still seem to be a bit of an adventurer. Tell us some of the things that still, what kind of gets you up in the morning, and where do you, I suppose, get your motivation from and inspiration to keep doing this? Because from most people's terms, you've been, your business so far has been very successful. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, adventure and sort of expeditions, that is ultimately my passion. I love it, and I like going to places where maybe other people wouldn't necessarily. When I was 19, I think just 6 months after the war began with Afghanistan, I became the first British tourist to get into the country. And I spent a week there in Kabul, which was nuts. And I sometimes now think I had very bad parents if they let me do that when I was 19. Last year I ran a marathon in North Korea, which was amazing, mind-boggling. Yeah, and a couple of months ago I was in Iraq, just as ISIS fell in Mosul. And I like being there for almost like world events. I like it when it's relevant. Going to North Korea maybe 10 years ago would not have been as so relevant as now, and I like being able to contextualize what's being said in the press with what I actually saw, because until you kick the tires, you're just listening to what other people say, and most of it in adventure travel especially is exaggerated, to sell the story. But that still motivates me. I every year I try and think of adventures, plans, places to visit, and I love it. In terms of motivating me for business, we have a lot of plans of like little innovations, and those really excite me. You're getting the team together and brainstorming, okay, how can we do something differently? I hate hearing when people say, we do it this way because that's how we've always done it. Right. That's the enemy to progress, in my view. So there's a lot of things that we want to bring to the market next year in particular. And innovating things and solving problems, I love. Yeah. And there's lots of things I'm very bad at. And I think the good thing is I've tried to recognize that and hopefully build teams around me that can support those weaknesses.
And what inspires you? Is there a person? Is there a business person, an adventurer? Who sort of is someone you say, well, that's...
Let's just assume I've said my dad for a second, just in case he hears this. Let's assume that's done. But I mean, I think the most inspiring person in the world right now is Elon Musk. Right. His vision and the things he wants to achieve will move the world further and quicker than most big governments have done in the last 20 years. So I think with his vision of reusable rockets, his lithium battery factories, so that we can all be driving driverless and electric cars in the future. His Hyperloop visions, I mean, it just goes on and on. The guy's a genius, and he's also got the most incredible work ethic. Yeah. So he would be sort of my business idol at this stage.
Yeah. And what about the future? What for you, for instance? What's your, you've achieved a lot by most people's standards. What do you see personally you've yet to go on and achieve?
Loads. I mean, that list could go on. I'm really proud of what we're doing. I want One Rebel to become pan-London, to be the best boutique operator in London, and that's the primary sort of focus and goal. From then, there's obviously opportunities to take the brand internationally, to go into other avenues like retail and apparel. Right. I like the idea of hotels, One Rebel hotels one day. But then afterwards, there's just so many things I'd like to get into. In a world post One Rebel.
What, out of the fitness industry?
Yeah. I love the fitness industry, but it's not my only interest. And I think there's lots of things I'd like to do, believe it or not, actually in politics. Oh, right. Which would be one day the end goal. If I don't have too many skeletons in my closet, at least, we'll have to review it one day.
And what about the fitness industry? What do you? It's gone through a lot of changes. I guess here in the UK still there's a lot. You go on most corners. There's a lot of low-cost gyms still. Where do you think the next sort of 5 to 10? What do you think this business will look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
So in terms of the industry, I like the low-cost clubs because they stand for something. They've said what they are.
Right.
It might not be for everybody, but it's no frills. It does what it says on the tin. So it's got an area, got a market, got a focus. I like companies like Equinox for what they do, what they bring to the table, and I love the boutiques. It's everything in the middle that I'm concerned about because I think they're going to start getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And when you look at the amount of revenue that's now shifted to the boutique industry in the US, I think the last stat I heard was something like 30 or 40% of revenue comes from the boutiques. Then my concern would be for those mid-tier operators who are often quite highly leveraged. As they start losing revenue to the shift towards boutique, they'll come close to breaking banking covenants, and I would predict that there'll be some blood on the streets for some of those operators. That's not always a bad thing because markets change, and this shift is being customer driven. Yeah. They are saying they prefer boutiques. They are saying they get results at these boutiques. So I'm always very pro my boutique competitors because I believe we're delivering a better service, better results, in a cooler, more fun environment. So the more boutiques for me, the better. Right. I think the shift has got to be away from those sort of more soulless big box operators who try and still lock people into long contracts.
And is that what you think then? Sort of the reason that because some of these models, I remember not too long ago they were thriving. What would you say is one of the main reasons that they've not been able to kind of the traditional ones been able to sort of move with the market?
Well, it's very hard for them now to change. You can't just suddenly redesign a 12,000 square foot gym into a boutique. It's more challenging. And I think when companies have decided, okay, we'll do the boutique thing as well, like Pure started Pure Ride, which unfortunately failed. The problem is it's very hard for these guys to do both and stand with integrity in front of their customer and say which one is best. Because you've got to pick, which one is better for you. Is it a boutique environment or is it the big box gym? And so I think doing both loses your integrity when you talk to the customer. But I think just there's been too many old practices. I went to a club, I probably won't say who it was, but I went to see them and I wanted to have a look round. And I was told I couldn't because a membership consultant wasn't available. Now, the problem with that is most people now, although there's still maybe 15% of the population members of clubs, what percentage have been a member of clubs in the last 10 years? It's got to be much, much higher. Right. So when I go to look at a fitness club as a customer, I want to see that it exists, that it's clean, and it's got the bits of kit that I'm focused on. I do not need a museum tour and then to sign a 12-page customer form to make that purchase. It's so antiquated versus now how you buy something on Airbnb or Uber. And so I think digging into these old practices is one of the big issues.
Right.
Because we couldn't tour the club. Yeah. Had to go. There you go.
And for One Rebel, what's sort of in the bag that you can talk about?
Well, we've signed 3 more sites, and we're negotiating 4th, and those will all open more or less in the first quarter of next year. Right. And that's going to take the business pan-London. So we'll be opening in South Bank Central, opposite the Mondrian Hotel, Victoria, Bayswater, and then hopefully King's Cross. Right. And that's going to be sort of the first wave of expansion next year.
Yeah. And international plans at all, or?
We get a lot of people writing to us about this, and I want to learn some lessons from the past as well and say, okay, we want to grow, every business wants to grow, but we don't want to dilute the integrity of the brand by a rush to growth. There's a lot we've still got to do better. Right. A lot, in my view. I think we're 80% of the way, and that last 20% is the key. So I want to focus on us becoming pan-London and as best as we can be before being sucked into sort of the growth for vanity, because it's too easy, it's too alluring, and it's not hard to get me on a plane. But those opportunities will come. I think if we can become the best we can be in London, then everything's open for us. Yeah,
great. James, great story, inspirational. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for your time. Cheers. Thank you.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.